We're joined now by Tom Borthwick. Tom is a candidate, of course, for Scranton School Board, and he is cross-filed on both the Republican and Democratic tickets. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to dig right into the questions, all right? The first question that I like to talk about is what makes the world go round, and that's money. So equitable funding from the state continues to be an issue. Please share your knowledge of the issue and describe how you can impact this as a school director.
So I can actually speak to this directly because in 2019 when I was on the board, we as a group began a very public fight for fair funding. I was even on the front page of the Times at a rally that we had. Three directors, me, myself, and Greg Popel in particular, went to every single PTA in the city of Scranton, gave them a presentation and said, hey, the state is shortchanging us to the tune of at least $30 million per year. That was in 2019. And because of that, that's why you're seeing massive cuts in services. That's why we were put in recovery. That's why, preschool is gone, libraries are gone. And all those things are obviously very detrimental to the city. So by having those informational sessions with PTAs and then also neighborhood groups, we started to basically kind of make a movement. People started showing up to school board meetings. People started pressuring their legislators. We, at the Trip Park Community Center, we had a rally so packed, a rally and planning meeting so packed that people were out the door into the parking lot because people were realizing that Scrantonians are getting shortchanged. And guess what? Taxes keep going up locally because the state's not chipping in. So that started the process of the governor, Governor Wolf at the time, starting to inject like 3 million here, 6 million there. And bit by bit, since 2019, you've seen state funding increase to the tune of, I think it's about 21 million per year, year over year, because they consistently added to our year over year funding. So right now, the Scranton School District's budget is $222 million per year. It was in 2019 only $269 million per year. So you're looking at like a little bit over $50 million a year in recurring funding. And you're seeing that these people, that now that we have that money, we're able to do new things, good things. So I would keep that fight going because I'm a veteran of that fight, and I helped the district achieve success in that fight. It's one of my proudest moments as a former director.
Okay, thank you. The next question, an equally important topic, is safety. What is the role the school board plays in ensuring the safety of our children?
So it's essential. The school board's essential. There are two things that the district needs to do that they have not done. One, on the date of that terrible mass shooting in Tennessee, the board had a meeting and voted to table a $3.6 million safety upgrade, a contract to upgrade the safety of all of our buildings. Why they chose that particular date to do that, I don't know. Their stated reasons were they needed more time to research it. But the firm that has proposed this has been giving presentations for months. The administration has worked on this for months. There's no reason not to implement these safety measures like identification systems like badges for visitors, doors that are secure because a lot of our buildings are older and you need modern upgrades to these doors. So I think that's a no-brainer, and I'm glad they've done things like increase the SSOs. I'd like to see more SROs, which are certified police officers as opposed to private security, but those have been good additions that the school board has made. And the last thing is our three problem buildings really are our middle schools. And they increased class length from, I think, about 42 minutes to 57 minutes to 62 minutes, depending. And first of all, you can't have kids sitting down that long and expect them to not fidget. They're 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But beyond that, they removed duty periods. So now there's not teachers or authority figures in the hallway. And those buildings have seen a disciplinary collapse because now there's not people in the hallway to discourage kids or to watch them or to protect them. And I hear from teachers all the time about how much of a disaster that's been. And you could actually track disciplinary instances, the rise from the time that they eliminated those duty periods. Not only did they eliminate duties, they eliminated a lot of the arts, which is sometimes the only thing that brings a kid into school. I think of my fondest memories of school, it's my classes that involve the arts, my music classes, my art classes. And I'm an English teacher. I love creative writing. I love journalism. So that would go a long way to fixing the security and safety issues in the middle school.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So the next question, closing a school is a hard decision to make. And I have a two-part question here. So the first part is, what factors should be considered when you have to vote on a closure? And the second part of that is what factors should not be considered when you have to vote on a closure.
So I'm gonna take issue with the first part of the question because I think it's actually easy. The answer is no. School closures don't help people. Unless it's falling into a mine, which thank God we've moved past that in Scranton, then I don't see the reason to destroy a neighborhood school. And I'll give you a good example because I went to tons of meetings, rallies with a lot of groups of people, organized the neighborhoods to try to save Bancroft, and the board didn't listen. And here's what happened. They closed Bancroft, and they said that there's excess capacity in all the buildings, which is a demonstrable lie because special ed children need more space than regular ed children, but they were enmeshing them in terms of square footage requirements. But that's the nitty gritty. But common sense states, okay, you're going to close a building, you got to move those kids. They moved all the Bancroft kids to Tripp. Guess what? Tripp is now overcrowded. So now they're moving fifth grade out of all the middle schools, but also Tripp, but they didn't have room for those fifth graders at West Intermediate. So guess where they are? They're in a dilapidated, falling apart trailer park in the parking lot of West Scranton Intermediate School. Of course, hundreds of kids are going in and out every day. They looked nice when they were debuted, but they're falling apart. And we're renting them. That's $1.8 million that we're paying for something that we don't get to own. $2.2 million was the cost to save Bancroft. Find $400,000 and save yourself a building. You know, now you have a dead building in the middle of a neighborhood that doesn't need to have a dead building. And how long was Lincoln Jackson closed and falling apart? So what factors need to be considered? Unless it's an absolute emergency, all the data shows that neighborhood schools are better for kids. And so I am 100% always in favor of neighborhood schools. I'm not closing anything.
Tom, lots of questions come up about transportation. And when I speak about transportation, I mean about getting kids to and from school. That's all I'm talking about. And this, again, is a two-part question. Discuss any changes that you believe are needed to the district's policies on transportation for students. And the second part, what factors, again, need to be considered when you're voting for change?
Okay, so in the paper in the past year, you've seen that there was a complete debacle with the bus contract. And our recovery officer, Dr. Finan, had a lot to do with that in the negative. Her job was to come here and prevent disasters like the previous bus contract from many years ago. And we ended up seeing that enabled. And then St. Pete's Garage sued the district for bid rigging, basically, and the decision to award the contract to a company called Christ was vacated and rebid, and then Pete's Garage ended up getting the contract. None of this debacle should have ever happened. In the court hearing, it came out that directors and Dr. Feiner were working directly with Christ, and Christ actually rewrote the contract to make it more favorable to them, submitted it to the district, and that's just what the board ended up voting on. You have to be able to read contracts. And I am a skeptic of everyone and everything, even myself. It's always good to ask questions. And if I don't know legalese, then I'm going to find somebody who does and somebody who I trust and get an opinion. And that clearly did not happen with that bus contract. So what I think in order to discuss or implement any kind of change, due diligence has to be there, and a certain sense of responsibility and knowledge needs to be in play as well. So that debacle should never have happened. And what I think we're getting at here is how do we prevent it from happening? And like I said, that's due diligence. Making sure that you read the contract. There is no way any vendor in the district should be dictating terms. You could even see, like highlighted in blue, add this, and then the district just did. And you didn't have any directors calling it out. Do I think that was malfeasance on their part? Not necessarily. A lot of people don't know legalese, but you really do have to go through these things with a fine-tooth comb, especially when you're dealing with millions of public dollars. It's part of upholding the public trust.
Okay. So this next topic is banning, and it's, again, going to be a two-part question. So what should go into a process or a decision if a call to ban books or critical race theory or anything else, anything that's floated that comes before the school board? What should go into a process or a decision for that? And then the second part of that is, are these decisions up to the board?
So I was an English teacher for 17 years, and I very rarely had to deal with this issue. And I would say the times that I did where somebody didn't want their child reading Macbeth because there are witches in it. Okay, you can have an alternate assignment, you can go to the library. There's never been a problem with our system up to this point. What you're seeing instead is just culture wars. And I hope to God that that doesn't happen to Scranton, and I hope that if it does, that we don't see administration or the school board fall into the trap of telling people what they should and shouldn't read, because I don't believe that is the responsibility of a board. I believe it's the responsibility of the board as like the final adjudicator if there's a problem that can't be resolved. But really, if there's an issue, administration should work with the teacher. So as a teacher, as a veteran teacher, 17 years, I know what's appropriate age level wise. That's my job. So I'm not going to teach something that isn't for that grade level because A, I'm not going to be able to get through to them correctly, but B, I'm not going to do anything inappropriate because I'm a professional. And I think the disconnect becomes like the idea that, and teachers have been getting attacked for years now, but I think not trusting teachers who are highly trained professionals. You have to get a master's or an equivalent every 5 years to maintain your job in the state of Pennsylvania. So trusting the teachers to do their jobs is really where it's at. If that can't happen because of a parent or a group being upset with a particular teacher in a particular book, then it goes to administration. And that really should be the end of it, because if there's a kid that has an issue with the book or a family that doesn't want their kid reading it, that's an easy fix. Don't read it. Here's an alternate assignment. It's a little bit more work on the teacher, but at least you're accommodating that family and being sensitive to whatever it is, their personal beliefs, their religious beliefs, whatever. I don't think banning books is appropriate at all. I don't believe in muting ideas. We're not going to teach Lolita to a kindergartner, and that's never happened and never will happen. So I think it's been an overblown culture war issue, but I don't believe the government should get involved in telling people what they can and can't read.
Okay. I have one more question for you. This one has a bit of an introduction, and then I'll ask the questions at the end. So, per legislation that was passed in April 2022, the Pennsylvania Department of Education must integrate culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies into teacher preparation, induction, and continuing professional development no later than the 23-24 academic year. And there are 9 competencies, and I'm not going to read them all because they have long names, but they're like one's cultural lens and microaggressions and culturally relevant learning, that kind of thing. So, 2 questions. What impact does or will this legislation have on our teachers and students? And what role will the school board have to play in ensuring compliance with this Pennsylvania law?
Okay, so 2 things. For the compliance part, it's a matter of directing administration to implement the law. So that's out of the way. What the value and impact of this is, it's very important, and I can't understate how. Because in my experience, so I grew up, a middle-class white West Side kid. There's a lot of cultural experiences I did not have. And so as a result, I grew up in that culture, and that's the culture that I'm comfortable and familiar with. I'm deeply interested in cultures that are unfamiliar to me, but there's no actual formal training. There was none for me before I became a teacher, or really even during the time of my being a teacher. So dealing with different Hispanic cultural traditions. And you use the word Hispanic as a monolith, for example, but it's not. I learned from my students that Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and Cubans and Dominicans are very, very different culturally and even linguistically. And I feel ignorant that coming into the profession, I didn't know that, but it's not something I was ever exposed to or taught. And so by implementing these things and helping teachers to become aware of different cultural backgrounds, you can help these kids to learn better, because now you know where they're coming from. And so what I learned throughout my career as I encountered different groups and talked to kids and learned about their values and their differences, I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? This kid's going to respond better to something like this than this kid would. Because of whatever cultural issue is at play. So I think that teachers can seriously benefit from that kind of of learning and professional growth.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have for questions, but you have 2 minutes to speak to the voters about your platform or whatever else you want to cover.
Sure. Here's the basic thing. I'm running, I have 2 sons. My son Tom is 6, my son Joe is 3. And they were robbed of the opportunity to go to preschool. And that's one of the things that is absolutely fundamental to the growth of a kid. And nobody did it better than Scranton. And it was free. Find a free preschool. That's not the case. And they're very, very expensive. And it ends up being like a quiet tax on people because it's coming out of parents' pockets. But then you're getting kids now who are in kindergarten who are unprepared, not potty trained, don't know their last names. And so now you have this massive disparity in capabilities that hurts every kid. when they could have been identified in preschool earlier and given the services that they needed. So number one, I'm in favor of bringing preschool back. It's going to be foundational in making education better for everyone because they're going to come through the system and just have a greater basis. Next, I pledge, I'm not closing any schools. We shouldn't have closed Bancroft. It's caused a complete disaster in terms of space. So, and they're doing a building study. They're asking for 4 buildings that can go. We don't have the room to shove kids into our existing buildings, let alone closing more and shuffling kids around. So I'm going to keep schools open. And I want to fix the middle school issues by reopening, by bringing back cut programs like the arts and libraries, because these things are havens for kids who are interested in school. I'm a product of that. I'm a product of the arts. I became an English teacher. I lived in the libraries, and now they're gone. They're being eviscerated. So that's only going to hurt kids in the long run. So the 3 things that I just brought up, bring back pre-K, saving our schools, and making sure to cut those, restore those cut programs, that's a recipe for a more successful Scranton, and that's why I believe I deserve people's vote.
All right. Thank you. That concludes our time with Tom Borthwick. Tom is cross-filed on both the Republican and the Democratic tickets. So on the May 16th primary, voters on either party can vote for Tom. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored that you had me.